You think you understand abandonment until you are standing on a stage, watching your birth mother freeze like a statue while thousands of people applaud. She did not freeze out of pride. She froze because she realized the valedictorian was the problem she tried to discard 15 years ago at a hospital in Dayton. The cruelest part was realizing they did not come here to apologize, but to collect a return on an investment they never made. My name is Kara Simmons, and today I was 28 years old. The air inside the massive arena in Columbus, Ohio, smelled of floor wax, stale popcorn, and the nervous sweat of 300 graduating medical students. It was a thick, humid heat that seemed to defy the industrial air conditioning, the kind of atmosphere that usually made me feel claustrophobic. But today, standing in the dark tunnel leading out to the floor of the Schottenstein Center, I did not feel trapped. I felt like a surgeon scrubbing in for the most important operation of her life. The roar of the crowd was a physical vibration against my chest, a thrumming bass line composed of thousands of families cheering, screaming, and blowing air horns. To my left and right, my classmates were adjusting their caps and checking their phones, buzzing with the frantic energy of people who had survived 4 years of sleep deprivation and caffeine addiction. They were thinking about residency matches and student loans. I was thinking about the woman in the cream-colored coat, sitting in the VIP section. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. I had spent years training these hands to hold scalpels, to insert central lines, to stitch skin back together with microscopic precision. Today they were empty, except for one thing. I ran my right thumb over the silver ring on my left index finger. It was a cheap thing, sterling silver that had tarnished and been polished back to life a dozen times. The metal was cool against my skin. It was the first gift Tessa had ever given me, back when I was a terrified teenager sleeping in a spare room in Huber Heights. It was my anchor. As long as I could feel that ring, I knew who I was. I was not the discarded file from the Redwood Children's Center. I was Dr. Kara Simmons. The line began to move. We walked out into the cavernous bowl of the arena, and the noise intensified into a deafening wall of sound. Spotlight swept across the sea of heads, cutting through the haze. I kept my head high, walking with the measured pace I had learned in the hospital corridors. Urgent, but calm, always calm. I scanned the rows of seats as we filed toward the front. It was a sea of faces, thousands of strangers witnessing our transition from students to healers, but I was only looking for 3 people. I found Tessa first. She was sitting in the general admission section, exactly where she said she would be. She was wearing her Sunday best, a simple navy blue dress that she had bought specifically for this occasion. Despite my offer to buy her something more expensive, she sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her posture perfect. She was not screaming or waving a sign. She was just smiling. It was a small, private smile that traveled all the way across the arena and settled in my chest. Her eyes met mine, and even from this distance, I could hear her voice in my head. "You just walk. Kara, I am right here." She was the lighthouse in the storm, the woman who had taken a broken girl and helped her rebuild herself, piece by jagged piece. Then, I shifted my gaze. I looked toward the VIP section, the area reserved for major donors, faculty families, and special guests. And there she was, Elaine, my birth mother. She was wearing a cream-colored coat that looked expensive, likely cashmere. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, sprayed into a rigid helmet of blonde that defied the humidity. Beside her sat Grant, my birth father, looking at his watch as if he had a golf tee time to catch. They looked exactly as I remembered them from 15 years ago. Just older. The lines around Elaine's mouth were deeper, etched by years of maintaining a facade of perfection. Grant's hairline had receded, but he still carried that air of dismissive arrogance, the posture of a man who believed the world existed to serve him. Elaine was staring intently at the program in her hands. Her fingers were gripping the glossy paper so tightly that the edges were crumpling. I saw her lips move, a slight tremor that she quickly suppressed by pressing her mouth into a thin, hard line. She was reading the list of graduates. She was looking for my name. A young man with a headset and a clipboard. An event coordinator looking stressed beyond belief. Crouched down beside my chair at the end of the row. He touched my shoulder tentatively. "Doctor?" "Simmons," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the din of the crowd. "I am so sorry to disturb you right now." I turned to him, keeping my expression neutral. "It is fine," I said. "What is wrong?" He hesitated, glancing toward the VIP section and then back to me. "We have a situation with the seating chart. There are 2 individuals in the reserved section, a Mr. and Mrs. Simmons. They claimed to be your parents and demanded to be seated in the front row. They made quite a scene with security about their rights as immediate family." I felt a cold smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Of course they did. They had not spent a dime on my tuition. They had not signed a single permission slip since I was 13. They had not been there when I had the flu, or when I got my driver's license, or when I was accepted into med school. But now, when there was a spotlight and a title involved, they were suddenly immediate family. They were here to claim the credit. They wanted the photo op. They wanted to turn to the people sitting next to them and say, "Yes, that is our daughter, the doctor." The coordinator looked anxious. "I can have them moved," he offered. "If you want, I can have security escort them back to general seating, or out of the building. It is your call. Kara?" I looked at him, and then I looked back at Elaine and Grant. They were settling into their stolen seats, adjusting their clothes, preparing to perform the role of proud parents. If I kicked them out, they would play the victim. They would tell everyone how their ungrateful daughter had snubbed them after all their sacrifices. They would spin the narrative, just like they always did. "No," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Let them stay." The coordinator blinked. Surprised. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," I said. "I want them exactly where they are. I want them to have the best view in the house." He nodded, looking relieved that he did not have to cause a scene, and scurried away. I turned back to the front, smoothing the fabric of my graduation gown. I was not here to scream at them. I was not here to cause a dramatic scene in the aisle or throw a drink in their faces. That was the old way. The way of a hurt child acting out. I was an adult now. I was a doctor. I understood how to diagnose a problem and how to treat it. Revenge, true revenge, is not about heat. It is not about explosion. It is about precision. It is about holding up a mirror so clean and so bright that the other person has no choice but to see the ugliness they have been hiding. I was not here to fight them. I was here to present the bill. The ceremony began. Speeches were made about the future of medicine, about the solemn oath we were about to take, about the sleepless nights and the terrifying responsibility of holding human lives in our hands. I sat still, listening. But every nerve ending in my body was attuned to the 2 people sitting 50 feet away from me. I could feel their presence like a localized infection. Finally, the dean of the School of Medicine stepped up to the podium. Dean Harrison was a formidable man with a voice that commanded attention. The arena quieted down. The murmuring ceased. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dean Harrison said, his voice booming through the high-quality speakers, "we come now to the presentation of the graduates. But before we begin the procession, it is our tradition to recognize the valedictorian of this class." I took a deep breath. This was it. The air in my lungs felt sharp and cold. This student has not only achieved the highest academic standing in the history of our program, the dean continued, but has also demonstrated an unwavering commitment to the compassionate care of our most vulnerable populations. Her research on trauma-informed care for adolescents has already begun to change policies in hospitals across the state. I saw Elaine look up from her program. She shifted in her seat. She looked confused. She did not know about the research. She did not know about the grades. She only knew that she had heard the last name Simmons and assumed she owned it. Dean Harrison paused for effect. He looked out over the crowd, his eyes finding me in the front row. "Please join me in welcoming the valedictorian of the class of 2026, Dr. Kara Simmons." The name rang out like a gunshot. My heart hammered against my ribs. a frantic rhythm that I forced to slow down. 1, 2, 1, 2. I stood up. As I rose, the giant jumbotron screen suspended above the center of the arena flickered to life. The camera feed cut from the dean to me, projecting my face 20 feet high for everyone to see. And then, as was the custom for the top honoree, the camera cut to the VIP section, looking for the family of the star student. It landed squarely on Elaine and Grant. The image on the screen was crystal clear. It showed every detail. It showed the expensive cream coat. It showed the silk tie. And it showed the exact moment the realization hit them. Elaine did not smile. She did not clap. She froze. It was a total physiological freeze response. I watched it happen on the screen even as I looked at her in real life. Her face went slack. Her eyes widened, not with joy, but with a sudden, terrifying recognition. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and waxen under the arena lights. Her hands, which had been reaching to smooth her hair, stopped in midair. She was not freezing because she was surprised her daughter was smart. She was freezing because she recognized the name. She recognized the face. But more than that, she recognized the threat. For 15 years, she had told herself a story. She had told her friends, her neighbors, and her social circle that her daughter had been troubled, that she had to be sent away for her own good, that the family had done everything they could, but the girl was simply broken. She had built a fortress of lies to protect her reputation. She had erased me to save herself. And now, the girl she had erased was standing on the biggest stage in the state, being hailed as the best of the best. Grant looked like he had been punched in the gut. His mouth hung slightly open, his arrogant composure shattered. He looked from the screen to me, and then back to the screen, as if trying to calculate the damage. He was a numbers man, and he knew the math did not add up. They were sitting in the VIP seats, claiming to be the parents of the success story, but they had not spoken to the success story in a decade and a half. The applause was deafening. Thousands of people were clapping, unaware of the drama playing out in the front row. They saw a proud moment. I saw a reckoning. I looked directly at Elaine. I did not smile. I did not wave. I just stared at her, my expression calm, professional, and utterly unyielding. I saw her throat work as she tried to swallow. She looked around frantically, as if realizing for the first time that there were cameras, that there were witnesses. She realized that by demanding those VIP seats, by forcing her way to the front to claim credit, she had walked directly into a trap of her own making. She had come to steal my light. Instead, the light was illuminating exactly who she was. The cameraman, sensing the lack of reaction, held the shot on them for a second too long. The confusion in the crowd began to ripple. Why were the parents not cheering? Why did they look like they were seeing a ghost? I turned my gaze away from them. Breaking the connection, I looked past the VIP section, past the expensive coats and the politicking, back to the general admission seats, back to the woman in the navy blue dress. Tessa was standing up. She was clapping so hard I thought her hands would sting. Tears were streaming down her face. Unchecked and unashamed, she was beaming at me, mouthing the words, "That is my girl." I took my first step toward the stairs leading up to the stage. My legs felt strong. The silver ring on my finger felt heavy and solid. Elaine was still frozen in her seat, a statue of regret and panic in a sea of celebration. She had thought she could just walk back in and take what she wanted. She thought the past was buried. But the past was not buried. It had just gone to medical school. As I climbed the steps to shake the dean's hand, I let the satisfaction settle in my chest, cool and sharp. This was not a reunion. This was an invoice, and payment was due immediately. The silence of a hospital room at 2 a.m. is heavy. It is not peaceful. It is a thick, suffocating weight that presses down on your chest, filled with the hum of machines and the distant squeak of rubber shoes on linoleum. I was 13 years old, curled into a ball under a thin white sheet, staring at the empty plastic chair where my father had sat hours before. The chair was pushed back slightly, at an angle, as if he had stood up in a hurry. That empty space screamed louder than any words they could have said. I was waiting for the door to open. Part of me, the stupid childish part, still believed they would walk back in with my overnight bag and a sheepish apology, but as the minutes ticked by on the digital clock on the wall, dragging from 2:15 to 2:30, that hope began to calcify into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Then, the door did open. I flinched, pulling the sheet up to my nose, but it was not Elaine with her perfume, and it was not Grant with his impatience. It was a nurse. I had seen her earlier during the chaos of the admission, moving in the background, but I had not really looked at her. Her name tag read Tessa Alvarez. She looked to be about 35, with dark hair pulled back into a messy bun that defied gravity, and eyes that looked like they had seen everything but decided to remain kind anyway. She was holding a small flashlight and a chart, moving with a quiet efficiency that did not disturb the air. She did not turn on the overhead lights. She did not bustle in with false cheeriness. She just walked to the side of my bed, checked the monitors, and noted something on the chart. Then she stopped. She looked at the empty chairs. Then she looked at the empty bedside table where a family photo or a stuffed animal should have been. Finally, she looked at me. "You are still awake," she said. It was not a question. Her voice was low, a warm alto that sounded like wood smoke. I nodded, gripping the sheet tighter. "Cannot sleep?" she asked. I shook my head. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, a sob would escape, and I was determined not to cry in front of strangers anymore. Tessa sighed, but it was not a sigh of annoyance. She pulled the rolling stool over to the side of the bed and sat down. She was not checking my blood pressure. She was not adjusting my IV. She was just sitting there. She rested her elbows on her knees and looked at me, really looked at me, in a way my parents had not done in years. She did not offer me a platitude. She did not tell me everything was going to be okay. She did not tell me my parents probably got stuck in traffic or lost track of time. She knew better. "Kara," she said softly, "I have a question for you, and I want you to be honest." I stared at her, wide-eyed. "If you could pick anyone in the world to be sitting in that chair right now," she said, gesturing to the empty space where Grant had been, "who would it be?" I blinked. I opened my mouth to say my mom and dad, because that was the right answer. That was the answer a good daughter gave. That was the answer that kept the illusion alive, but the words stuck in my throat. I looked at the chair. I imagined Elaine sitting there, checking her watch, worrying about her gala. I imagined Grant complaining about the cost of the room, and suddenly, the truth clawed its way up. "I do not know," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Just someone who wants to be there." The dam broke. The tears I had been holding back since Dr. Klein left the room exploded out of me. I buried my face in the scratchy hospital pillow and sobbed. It was an ugly, gasping cry, the sound of a heart breaking in real time. I expected Tessa to leave. I expected her to page a doctor or tell me to hush because there were other patients, but she did not move. She reached out and placed a hand on my ankle, over the blanket. Her grip was firm and grounding. She just sat there and let me cry. She bore witness to my grief without trying to fix it. When the sobs finally subsided into hiccuping breaths, Tessa handed me a tissue from her pocket. "I know that look," she said quietly. I wiped my nose, looking at her through swollen eyes. What look? The look of a kid who just realized the adults in the room are not the heroes. She said. She leaned back on the stool. "I grew up in the system. Kara, foster care, group homes. I moved 6 times before I was 12. I know exactly what an empty chair feels like, and I know exactly what it feels like to scan a room and realize you are the only one looking out for you." I sniffed, surprised. "You were in foster care?" She nodded. "Since I was 4. And let me tell you something, you develop a radar. You can spot a kid who has been left behind from a mile away. It is in the shoulders. You hold them up so high, like you are bracing for a hit." I unconsciously lowered my shoulders. I had not even realized I was tensed up. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, Because you need to know that you are not invisible, she said fiercely. Your parents walking out that door says everything about them, and absolutely nothing about you. Do you hear me? You are not the problem. They are just broken people who do not know how to hold something precious without dropping it. She stood up then, checking the monitor one last time. Try to sleep. Kara, I am on shift until 7. I will be right outside at the station. You are not alone tonight. She kept her word. Every time I woke up from a fitful doze, I saw her silhouette in the doorway, checking, just checking. The next morning brought the harsh light of day and the return of reality. Janine Mercer, the social worker, came back into the room around 10. She looked tired, her file folder even thicker than the day before. Tessa was there too. Even though her shift had technically ended hours ago, she was standing by the window, arms crossed, looking protective. Janine pulled up a chair. Kara, we need to talk about the next steps, she said gently. I have spoken with your parents this morning via telephone. I held my breath. They have confirmed that they are unable to participate in your care plan at this time, Janine said, choosing her words with diplomatic care. They have agreed to the temporary guardianship arrangement we discussed. It was official. I was a ward of the state. Janine continued. Now, usually, in these situations, we look for a kinship placement. An aunt? A grandparent? Do you have any relatives who might be willing to step in? I shook my head. My grandparents were dead. My parents had alienated most of their siblings years ago because they were not successful enough to be associated with. Okay, Janine said. Then we look at medical foster care. We need to find a home that is certified to handle your medical needs. It might take a few days to find the right match. In the meantime, you will stay here. I felt the panic rising again. Foster care, strangers, people who did not know me, who did not know I was afraid of the dark, who did not know I liked my toast cut in triangles. Actually, Tessa spoke up from the window. Her voice cut through the sterile air. Janine, can I speak with you in the hallway for a moment? Janine looked surprised, but she nodded. They stepped outside, through the glass window of the door. I watched them. Tessa was talking animatedly, using her hands. Janine was listening, nodding slowly, looking at her clipboard, then looking back at Tessa. It looked like an intense negotiation. After 10 minutes, they came back in. Janine looked stunned. Kara, Janine said, sitting back down. Tessa has made a very generous offer. She is a certified medical professional, which puts her in a unique position. She has expressed interest in applying for your temporary emergency guardianship. I looked at Tessa. She was smiling, that same small, tired smile from the night before. You, I whispered, but you barely know me. I know enough, Tessa said. She walked over to the bed. I have the space. I have the training. I have a guest room that is currently being used to store a treadmill I never use. And more importantly, I know what it takes to get through this treatment. But I am sick. I said, the fear speaking for me. It is going to be hard. Doctor, Klein said it is a lot of work. I am a difficult case. Tessa reached out and took my hand. Her skin was rough, scrubbed clean 1,000 times with hospital soap. Kara, look at me, she commanded. You are not a case. You are a person. You are a kid who likes strawberry jello and is scared of the dark. I saw you looking at the nightlight last night. You are not a diagnosis. You are a human being, and human beings deserve a home, not a facility. I looked at Janine. Is that allowed? It is unorthodox, Janine admitted. But given Tessa's credentials and background check, and the immediate need for medical stability, yes, we can fast-track the emergency placement, if you are okay with it. Kara, if I was okay with it, it was like asking a drowning person if they wanted a life raft. Yes, I said, please. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, logistics, and a slow, cautious transition. I moved into Tessa's small house in Huber Heights. It was nothing like the sprawling, cold mansion I had grown up in. It was small. The carpets were a little worn. The kitchen cabinets were painted a bright, cheerful yellow, but it was warm. Tessa did not try to replace my mother. She did not force intimacy. She just showed up. She created a routine. Every morning, before she went to sleep after her night shift, she would set out my medications in a little color-coded box. She would write notes on the whiteboard in the kitchen. Eat the oatmeal. Drink the water. You got this. She drove me to every single appointment, and that was where the real work happened. The drives. At first, we sat in silence, but slowly. The silence filled with music. Tessa loved 80s rock. She would sing along to Bon Jovi and Queen at the top of her lungs, drumming on the steering wheel. Eventually, I started humming along, then singing. It was in that beat-up Honda Civic that I learned it was okay to make noise. In my parents' house, noise was discouraged. Silence was golden. But with Tessa, noise was life. She sat in the waiting rooms with me. She did not check her watch. She brought crossword puzzles and we did them together. She learned the names of all the receptionists. She made the terrifying, sterile world of the hospital feel like a neighborhood hangout. But I still had that nagging fear. The fear that I was a burden. I knew how expensive gas was. I knew how much time this took. I knew she was single, living on a nurse's salary. One afternoon, about 2 months into living with her, I was sitting in the waiting room at the clinic while Tessa went to the restroom. I was bored, so I wandered over to the bulletin board where the staff posted schedules and announcements. I was not snooping. Exactly. I was just reading. I saw a memo pinned to the corkboard. It was dated 3 weeks ago. Shift change requests, approved. I scanned the list, looking for names I recognized. And there it was. Alvarez. T. Request. Downgrade from shift lead to standard floor nurse. Change from weekend/overnight differential to weekday/days. I frowned. I knew enough about how the world worked to know that downgrade meant less money, and I knew that overnight shifts paid a lot more than day shifts. The weekend differential was a huge chunk of a paycheck. I did the math in my head. By switching to days, she could drive me to my appointments. By giving up the lead position, she had more flexibility to leave if the school called or if I had a flare-up. But the cost? She was losing easily 20% of her income, maybe more. I felt a lump form in my throat. She had never mentioned it, not once. She had complained about traffic. She had complained about the cafeteria food, but she had never once complained about the money or the schedule. I walked back to my chair and sat down, feeling the weight of that piece of paper. My parents, who had millions, had looked at the cost of my care and seen a bad investment. Tessa, who clipped coupons for groceries, had looked at the cost and decided I was worth the loss. Tessa came back from the restroom, wiping her hands on her scrubs. She was smiling, holding 2 vending machine sodas. "Got you the grape one," she said, tossing it to me. "I know it is your favorite even though it tastes like purple chemicals." I caught the cold can. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the dark circles under her eyes that she tried to hide with concealer. I saw the scuff on her shoe she had not replaced. "Tessa," I said quietly, "you changed your shifts." She paused. The tab of her soda half popped. She looked at me, and I saw a flicker of hesitation. She did not play dumb. I did. She said simply, "But you make less money." I said, "I saw the memo. You gave up the lead spot. That is a lot of money." "Tessa." She popped her soda. The sound was sharp and loud in the quiet waiting room. She took a long sip, then sat down next to me. She turned her body so she was facing me, her knees touching mine. "Kara," she said, her voice serious. "Money is a tool. You use it to build the life you want. Before, I was working all those extra hours because I did not have anyone to go home to. I was just banking cash for a future I had not figured out yet." She reached out and tapped the toe of my sneaker with hers. "But now," she said, "I have somewhere to be. I have appointments to keep. And frankly, I was getting tired of the night shift anyway. Dealing with drunks at 3 a.m. is not as glamorous as it sounds." "You are lying," I said, "but there was no malice in it. You did it for me, so you could drive me." Tessa shrugged. One shoulder up, one shoulder down. A gesture that said, "So what? I did it for us," she corrected. "Because that is what a family does. We adjust. We make it work. And I would rather be broke and have you healthy than be rich and have you sitting in this waiting room alone." I stared at the grape soda can in my hands. The condensation was dripping onto my fingers. I felt a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the warmth of being chosen, not because of my grades, not because of my appearance, not because of what I could do for someone's reputation, but simply because I was there. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay," she echoed. "Now drink your purple sludge. Doctor, Klein is going to call us back in 10 minutes, and I want you hydrated." I cracked open the can. It hissed. It was the best sound I had ever heard. I took a sip, and the artificial grape flavor tasted like hope. That was the day I stopped waiting for my parents to come back. That was the day I realized that family is not about blood. It is about who shows up. It is about who changes their schedule. It is about who buys you the purple soda. Tessa Alvarez did not just save my life in a medical sense. She saved my soul. And as I sat there next to her, listening to her hum a Bon Jovi song under her breath, I knew that I would spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that sacrifice, not because I owed her, but because she had taught me that love was a verb, and she was the best practitioner of it I had ever met. The transition from the sterile white walls of the Redwood Children's Center to the small brick ranch house in Huber Heights was not just a change of address. It was a change of atmosphere. My parents' house had been a museum, a place of vaulted ceilings and echoing hallways where you were afraid to touch anything for fear of leaving a fingerprint. Tessa's house was a living organism. It breathed. The floorboards in the hallway creaked. The refrigerator hummed a low, steady bass note, and the air always smelled faintly of laundry detergent and roasted garlic. I came home with her on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember the day because the sky was a bruised purple, threatening a storm that never actually broke. I stood in the entryway with my small duffel bag, feeling like an intruder. I was waiting for the rules. I was waiting for the list of forbidden rooms, the schedule of when I was allowed to speak, the boundaries of my existence. Tessa just dropped her keys in a ceramic bowl by the door and kicked off her shoes. "Welcome to the castle," she said, gesturing to the living room where a worn beige sofa sat facing a television that looked like it was from the previous decade. "It is not much, but the roof does not leak and the heater works most of the time." She led me to the room that was to be mine. It was small, painted a soft, neutral gray. There was a twin bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a simple wooden desk, and a window that looked out onto the backyard where a single oak tree stood guard. But what caught my eye was not the furniture. It was the whiteboard mounted on the wall next to the door. It was a simple dry erase board, divided into 3 sections with black tape: good day, hard day, rest day. I looked at Tessa, confused. She leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed. "Here's the deal. Kara, I am a nurse, not a mind reader, and you are a teenager who has been through hell. So I'm guessing you are not big on talking about your feelings right now." I said nothing. She was right. "So, we use the board," she explained. "Every morning, or whenever you feel like it, you put a magnet in the box that fits. If it is a good day, we can do homework, we can go to the store, we can tackle the big stuff. If it is a hard day, I back off. We do the bare minimum. We get through it, and if it is a rest day, we shut the door. We watch movies, and we let the world wait. You dictate the pace." I stared at the board. In my old life, there were no rest days. There were only days where you performed, and days where you were criticized for not performing well enough. The idea that I could simply declare a day hard and have that be respected, not punished, not fixed, just respected, felt alien. I picked up the small red magnet shaped like a star. My hand trembled slightly as I placed it in the box labeled Hard Day. Tessa nodded. She did not ask why. She did not try to cheer me up. "Understood." She said, "I will order pizza. We will eat on the floor." That was the beginning of the new rhythm. Learning to trust Tessa was not a singular event. It was a slow, agonizing process of unlearning 15 years of conditioning. I was like a rescue dog that flinches when you raise a hand to pet it. I expected every kindness to come with an invoice, every morning. Before she left for her shift, or after she came home, Tessa would come to my door. She would knock first, always. She never just barged in. "Where does it hurt today?" she would ask. It was a medical question, but it felt like a prayer, when my mother used to ask about my health. Her tone was always laced with accusation, as if my illness was a stain on her carpet. "Are you sick again?" she would ask, implying that I was doing it on purpose, but Tessa asked, "Where does it hurt?" She was acknowledging the pain, not judging it. Some days I would say, "My joints," and she would get the heating pad. Some days I would say, "My stomach," and she would make ginger tea. And some days, after a few months, I gathered the courage to say, "My head, everything is too loud." On those days, she would close the curtains. She would turn off the radio in the kitchen. She would move through the house like a ghost, silencing the world so I could breathe. She taught me that my needs were not inconveniences. They were just data points, information she used to care for me. School was another battlefield. I could not go back to regular classes yet. My immune system was still too fragile, and the fatigue hit me like a sledgehammer at random intervals. So, the school district set me up with a homebound program. Tessa was brilliant at medicine, but she was hopeless at algebra. We sat at the kitchen table one evening, staring at a worksheet full of quadratic equations. The overhead light buzzed. I was frustrated, on the verge of tears, feeling the familiar wave of stupidity that used to wash over me when my father would sigh at my report card. "I cannot do it," I said, pushing the paper away. "I'm just going to fail. It does not matter anyway. Who needs a sick doctor?" Tessa did not sigh. She did not tell me I was being dramatic. She picked up the pencil I had thrown. "Okay," she said, "I have no idea what X is doing with Y either, but we are going to figure it out." She pulled out her laptop. She spent 2 hours watching tutorial videos on the internet with me. We paused. We rewound. We argued with the instructor on the screen. We made popcorn. When we finally solved the first problem, Tessa cheered so loud she startled the neighbor's dog. "See," she said, pointing the pencil at me, "you are not stupid. Kara, you are just learning a new language. And we do not quit on hard things in this house. We just find a different way to explain them." She sat there with me until midnight. She had to be up at 5 a.m. for work. She never complained. She never made me feel like I was wasting her time. In that kitchen, under that buzzing light, I learned that failure was not a character flaw. It was just a step in the process. But the physical healing was the easy part. The mind was a different story. Tessa insisted on therapy. She found a psychologist named Dr. Evans who specialized in adolescent trauma and chronic illness. I fought it at first. I sat in Dr. Evans's office with my arms crossed, staring at the clock, refusing to speak. I did not want to open the box. I knew there were monsters in there, but Dr. Evans was patient, and Tessa was persistent. She drove me there every Thursday. She sat in the waiting room, reading her paperback novels, a silent sentinel ensuring I went in and came out. One afternoon, about 6 months in, I finally cracked. They threw me away. I said to Dr. Evans, my voice shaking. They looked at the paperwork. They looked at the cost, and they decided I was too expensive. I have a price tag, and it was too high. Dr. Evans leaned forward. "Kara, do you think your value is determined by what you can do for people?" "Yes," I shot back. "That is how the world works. If you are broken, you get replaced. That is how a business works," she corrected. "That is not how a family works. You are measuring yourself with a ruler that your parents gave you, but that ruler is broken. You need to find a new way to measure." I went home that day feeling raw, like my skin had been peeled back. I walked into the house, and I heard Tessa on the phone in the kitchen. I stopped in the hallway. I knew I should announce myself, but something in her tone made me freeze. It was her professional voice, the one she used with doctors and administrators. "I appreciate the offer, Mrs. Galloway," Tessa was saying. "I really do. It is an incredible opportunity." I held my breath. Mrs. Galloway was the director of nursing at the big hospital downtown. "Yes, the salary increase is significant," Tessa continued, "and I know the administrative role is a step up. But I have to look at the schedule." There was a pause. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. "I cannot do Tuesdays and Thursdays until after 5, Tessa said firmly, "and I cannot do on-call weekends right now. I have commitments at home that are non-negotiable." Another pause. "I understand," Tessa said. "If the position requires that level of flexibility, then I will have to decline." "No, I am sure. Thank you for thinking of me." She hung up. I stood there in the hallway, my heart pounding against my ribs. She had just turned down a promotion. She had just turned down more money. She had turned it down because of my therapy appointments on Thursdays. She had turned it down because I needed her on weekends. She had chosen me. Again, she did not know I was there. She did not do it to prove a point. She did it because it was simply the choice she wanted to make. I backed away quietly. Retreating to my room, I sat on my bed and looked at the whiteboard. I moved the magnet from hard day to good day. I did not tell her I heard. But that night, when she asked what I wanted for dinner, I offered to cook. It was a small thing, just spaghetti with jarred sauce, but it was my way of saying thank you. A year passed, then 18 months. The seasons changed outside the window. The oak tree lost its leaves and grew them back. I grew 2 inches. My blood work stabilized. The infusions were working. I was getting stronger, not just physically, but everywhere. One evening, Janine Mercer came over for dinner. This was not a surprise inspection. Janine had become a regular fixture in our lives, a friend more than a caseworker. But tonight, she brought the file folder. We sat at the kitchen table after the plates had been cleared. The air felt charged. "Kara," Janine started, folding her hands on the table. "We need to talk about the timeline." I felt a spike of fear. The temporary guardianship order was coming up for review. This was the time when the state usually tried to push for reunification or looked for a permanent placement. "Your parents," Janine said, her face neutral, "have made no contact. They have not responded to the quarterly updates. They have not requested visitation. For all intents and purposes, they have abandoned their rights." I nodded. I knew this. I did not care about them anymore, or at least, I told myself I did not. "So, we have a choice," Janine said. "We can renew the temporary guardianship. It keeps things as they are. Or we can move forward with a termination of parental rights and file for adoption." The word hung in the air. Adoption. It sounded huge. Final, permanent. Janine looked at Tessa, then at me. Tessa has already completed the necessary coursework. Her home study is approved. The state is ready to sign off. But this is not about the state. This is about you. Kara, you are almost 15. You get a say. I looked at Tessa. She was sitting very still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked terrified. For the first time, I realized that she was scared too. She was scared I would say no. She was scared I was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Still waiting for my real parents to come back and claim their property. "If I say yes," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "it means I am yours, like, legally. It means you are my daughter," Tessa said. Her voice was thick, wobbling slightly. "It means no one can take you away. It means you are stuck with me and my bad cooking and my 80s music forever, or at least until you go to college." I looked around the kitchen. I looked at the whiteboard with the magnets. I looked at the calendar on the wall, filled with my appointments written in Tessa's messy handwriting. I looked at the woman who had learned how to cook gluten-free pasta because my stomach could not handle the regular kind. The woman who had given up a promotion so she could drive me to talk about my feelings. My birth parents had given me a name, and then they had given me away. Tessa had given me a life. I thought about the hospital room. I thought about the empty chair. And then I looked at the chair Tessa was sitting in. It was not empty. It never would be. I want to stay, I said. Janine smiled. A genuine, wide smile. I did not mean just stay, I corrected myself. I looked directly at Tessa. I want to be adopted. I want to be your daughter. Tessa let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She stood up, knocking her chair back, and reached for me. I stood up too, and she pulled me into a hug that squeezed the air out of my lungs. It was not a polite hug. It was a desperate, fierce embrace. She buried her face in my hair. I could feel her shaking. I wrapped my arms around her waist and held on just as tight. I smelled her soap and the faint scent of the hospital that always clung to her scrubs. And for the first time in 15 years, I did not feel like a guest. I did not feel like a patient. I did not feel like a burden. I felt like I was home. We stood there in the kitchen for a long time, while Janine quietly shuffled papers in the background. Okay, Tessa whispered into my hair. Okay, we are doing this. You and me. Yes, I said against her shoulder. You and me. And in that moment, in a small house in Huber Heights, with a pile of paperwork on the table and a storm brewing outside, I made the first real decision of my life. I fired my parents, and I hired a mother who actually applied for the job. Peace is a strange thing when you have spent your life waiting for the other shoe to drop. You learn to distrust the quiet, but over the next 4 years, the quiet in the house on Huber Heights became something I actually started to believe in. It was not the silence of neglect, it was the silence of safety. I was 17 years old. My health was stable, managed by a routine that Tessa and I had perfected down to a science. I was back in regular school, sitting in the front row of AP Biology, devouring textbooks with a hunger that alarmed my teachers. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I did not want to be a doctor because of the prestige or the money. I wanted to be a doctor because I knew what it felt like to be a puzzle piece that someone else had given up on solving. I wanted to be the person who stayed in the room when everyone else walked out. Tessa was working the day shift at the clinic. We had a rhythm. I came home, started my homework, and put a casserole in the oven. The mail usually sat on the small console table by the door, a pile of circulars and bills that we tackled on Fridays. But on this particular Tuesday in November, a single envelope caught my eye. It was not a junk flyer. It was a window envelope with the official seal of the Internal Revenue Service, and through the little plastic window, I saw my name, Cara Marie Simmons. My stomach did a slow roll. I was 17. I had a part-time job shelving books at the library, but I certainly did not make enough money to attract the attention of the federal government. I picked up the envelope. It felt heavy. I waited for Tessa. I did not open it. We had a rule. Scary things get opened together. When Tessa walked in at 5:30, smelling of antiseptic and rain, she saw me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the letter like it was a bomb. She did not even take off her coat. She dropped her keys, walked over, and sat down opposite me. "Open it," she said calmly. I slit the envelope with a butter knife. I pulled out the folded paper. It was a notice regarding an audit of a tax return filed 2 years prior. It referenced a dependent care credit and a disability tax exemption claimed for a minor child. Cara Marie Simmons, residing at an address in a gated community in Bexley, Ohio. I read it twice. Then I handed it to Tessa. She read it slowly. Her eyebrows pulled together, creating a deep crease in her forehead. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she stood up, walked to the phone, and dialed Janine Mercer's number. Janine was at our house in 40 minutes. The 3 of us sat around the table, the letter lying in the center like a dead animal. Janine had brought her laptop. She was typing furiously, her face illuminated by the blue light of the screen. "It appears," Janine said, her voice tight with suppressed rage, "that your biological parents have been busy." "Busy doing what?" I asked. Janine turned the laptop around so we could see. It was a spreadsheet of tax filings. "They have been claiming you," Janine said, "for the last 4 years. Ever since they signed the temporary guardianship papers, they have listed you as a dependent living in their home. They have claimed the maximum deduction for a child with a chronic illness. They have even claimed a credit for in-home medical equipment that I know for a fact they never purchased. I felt the blood drain from my face. They were getting paid. They were getting paid to be my parents, even though they had not seen me since I was 13. It is tax fraud, Tessa said, her voice low and dangerous. It is worse than that. Janine said, it is exploitation. They are using your diagnosis. The very diagnosis they said was too much for them to handle, to lower their tax bracket. They turned your illness into a tax shelter. I sat back in my chair, feeling a wave of nausea. I thought I was done with them. I thought they had just walked away and forgotten me. But this was colder. This meant they remembered me every April. They remembered me exactly once a year. When they sat down with their accountant and needed to reduce their liability, I was not a daughter. I was a write-off. How did they get away with it? I asked. Because on paper, the guardianship was temporary. Janine explained. The system is big, Kara, and it is messy. Unless someone flags it, the IRS does not automatically cross-reference state guardianship records with federal tax returns. They assumed no one would check. They assumed you were just a silent little girl in the system who would never know the difference. Tessa stood up. She walked to the sink and gripped the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. I could see her shoulders shaking. She was not crying. She was furious. They are making money off her pain. Tessa whispered. She spun around, her eyes blazing. They threw her away like garbage. And then they dug her out of the bin once a year to cash a check. I had never seen Tessa this angry. She was usually the calm one, the anchor, but this violation had touched a nerve that went deep. It was not just about the money. It was about the audacity of ownership without responsibility. We are going to sue them, Tessa said. We are going to report them. I want them in jail. Janine took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. We can report them to the IRS, Janine said, and we will. But Kara, you need to understand something. People like Elaine and Grant Simmons, they have lawyers, expensive ones. They will claim it was a clerical error. They will blame their accountant. They will pay a fine, write a check, and make it go away. They will not go to jail for this. Then what do we do? I asked. Do we just let them get away with it? Janine looked at me. Her expression was serious. No, we do not let them get away with it, but we have to be smart. If we attack them now, while you are still a minor, while the adoption is not finalized, they could make things difficult. They could contest the placement just to be spiteful. They could drag this out in court for years. The room went silent. The fear of being dragged back into their orbit paralyzed me. I did not want to see them. I did not want to be in a courtroom with them. 2 days later, the situation got darker. Janine called us back to her office. When we arrived, she looked pale. She closed the door and locked it, which she never did. I got a phone call this morning, Janine said, from an administrative assistant at Redwood Children's Center, a woman named Mrs. Gable. She is retiring next month, and she said she has been carrying something on her conscience for 4 years. I sat down, gripping Tessa's hand. Mrs. Gable was the one who processed your admission paperwork the day you were hospitalized, Janine said. She told me that your parents did not just decide to leave you that day in the doctor's office. What do you mean? I asked. Janine opened a file. She took out a photocopy of a handwritten note. Mrs. Gable said your father called the hospital billing department 3 days before you were admitted. Before Dr. Klein even gave the official diagnosis. He wanted to know the specific policy regarding state custody and financial liability for long-term patients. He asked if surrendering custody would protect their assets from medical debt. I felt the room spin. 3 days before, I whispered. Janine nodded. They knew. Kara, or they suspected, and they were running the numbers. The meeting with Dr. Klein where they acted so shocked? That was theater. They had already decided. They were just waiting for the doctor to say the words so they could execute the plan. I felt a coldness settle in my bones that was different from the chill of abandonment. This was the chill of calculation. I had not just been left behind in a moment of weakness. I had been liquidated. I was a bad stock they had decided to dump before the market opened. Tessa did not scream this time. She went very quiet. She looked at the note, then at me. "Okay," Tessa said. "That is it." She stood up and grabbed her purse. "Come on, Kara, we are going to Office Depot." I followed her, confused. "Office Depot? Why?" "Because we are done being victims," Tessa said. We went to the store. Tessa marched to the aisle with the office supplies and bought the thickest, brightest red binder she could find. She bought a 3-hole punch. She bought dividers. We went home, and we spent the entire weekend building the file. We put everything in there. The tax notice, the notes from Janine, the copies of the guardianship orders, every medical bill Tessa had paid, every report card, every letter from the school. We organized it chronologically. We highlighted the dates. Tessa sat at the kitchen table, hole-punching a document with a violent thwack. "This is your shield, Kara," Tessa said, "and it is your sword." They think they can rewrite history because they have money. They think they can tell a story about how they were heartbroken parents who had no choice. But paper does not lie. Dates do not lie. She handed me the binder. It was heavy. "You keep this," she said. "You keep it safe, and you never, ever let them gaslight you. If they ever try to come back, if they ever try to say they loved you, you open this book." I ran my hand over the red plastic cover. It felt like armor. But Tessa was not done. She started teaching me things that they do not teach in high school civics class. She taught me how to request my own credit report. She taught me how to lock my social security number so no one could open a line of credit in my name. She taught me the difference between a trust and a custodial account. You have to be smarter than them. Tessa told me one night as we sat on the porch, watching the fireflies. They have money. You have the truth. But the truth is only useful if you know how to wield it. I asked her, "Should we send the binder to the police? Should we send it to the newspapers?" Tessa shook her head. "Not yet. Why not?" I asked. "Because right now, you are just a teenager with a grievance," she said, "and they are pillars of the community. People believe what they want to believe, and they want to believe that wealthy, beautiful people are good. If you fight them now, it is a messy domestic dispute." She turned to look at me, her eyes reflecting the porch light. "But one day, Kara, you are going to be someone. You are going to be a doctor. You are going to have a voice that people listen to. And when you stand in the light, they are going to try to stand next to you to share it." She pointed to the red binder inside the house. "That is when you use it. Justice is not always a lawsuit. Justice is not always a gavel. Sometimes, justice is just turning on the lights in a room where everyone has been sitting in the dark. Sometimes, justice is just letting people see what is actually there." I looked at her, and I understood. I was playing the long game. They had played the short game, the quick exit, the tax break, the easy way out. But I was going to play the long game. I was going to build a life so undeniable, so brilliant, that they would inevitably try to claim credit for it. It was their nature. They were parasites of success, and when they did, I would be ready. I took the red binder and put it on the highest shelf in my closet. Behind my winter sweaters, it sat there like a loaded gun. I went back to school with a new focus. I did not just want to get into medical school anymore. I wanted to be undeniable. I studied until my eyes burned. I volunteered at the clinic on weekends. I shadowed doctors. I became obsessed with the ethics of care, with the laws surrounding patient advocacy. I was building my case, not in a courtroom, but in the classroom. Every time I got an A, I thought of the tax return. Every time I won an award, I thought of the phone call to the billing department. Every time I looked at Tessa, tired but smiling, making me a sandwich after a long shift, I thought of the empty chair. I made a promise to myself, a silent vow whispered in the dark of my bedroom in Huber Heights. Let them live their lie. I told myself, let them go to their galas and their Aspen trips. Let them pretend I do not exist, because one day, I am going to be the only thing anyone wants to talk about. And when that day comes, I will not let them write the caption. I was 17, and I had a red binder and a mother who loved me enough to buy it. It was more than enough. It was everything. Graduating high school at the top of my class felt less like a victory and more like securing a base camp before climbing the real mountain. The applause in the gymnasium was loud, but my ears were tuned to a different frequency. I was focused on the envelope waiting for me on the kitchen counter in Huber Heights. It was the acceptance letter from Lakeview University, a prestigious institution in Ohio known for its rigorous pre-medical program. I did not just get in, I got a merit scholarship that covered 70% of the tuition. When I showed the letter to Tessa, she did not scream. She just let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 4 years. She hugged me, and I felt her shoulders shake, a silent release of the terror that she would not be able to give me the future I deserved. But 70% is not 100%. Lakeview was expensive. The remaining 30%, plus room and board, books, and lab fees, amounted to a number that would make a normal person choke. I sat at the kitchen table with a calculator, running the numbers. I can get a job, I said, tapping the paper. I can work at the library on campus. I can do work study. Tessa took the calculator out of my hand and set it aside. Kara, she said, her voice firm, you are going to be a doctor. Do you know what that requires? It requires a 4.0 grade point average. It requires research. It requires volunteering. You cannot do that if you are flipping burgers until 2 a.m. But the money, I argued, I will handle the money. She said, that is the deal. You handle the grades, I handle the bills. You are not allowed to worry about the electric bill. Kara, you are only allowed to worry about organic chemistry. She said it with such confidence that I believed her. I packed my bags. I took the red binder from the top shelf of my closet, and I moved into a dorm room that smelled of floor wax and possibility. My time at Lakeview was not characterized by parties or football games. It was a monastic existence. I treated the library like a cathedral. I was not just studying to pass. I was studying to prove a hypothesis, that a discard pile could produce a diamond. I chose a double major in biology and psychology. I was fascinated by the intersection of the body and the mind, specifically how trauma rewrites the nervous system. I wanted to understand the mechanism of my own history. Why did my mother freeze? Why did I survive? I began working with Dr. Eris Thorne, a leading researcher in adolescent development. I proposed a research project during my sophomore year titled The Physiological Correlates of Parental Abandonment in Adolescents with Chronic Autoimmune Disorders. It was a mouthful, but it was my life on paper, stripped of the names and turned into data. Doctor, Thorne was impressed. You write with a very specific insight. Kara, he told me during office hours, it is rare to see an undergraduate understand the patient perspective this deeply. I just smiled and thanked him. I did not tell him that I was the patient. I did not tell him that the case studies I cited were people I had met in waiting rooms, people who, like me, had been left behind, as I thrived academically. Tessa was fighting a war I was not allowed to see. She came to visit me once a month. We would go to a diner near campus, order pancakes, and talk. But I started to notice things. I noticed the dark circles under her eyes that concealer could no longer hide. I noticed that she was wearing the same pair of sneakers she had worn 3 years ago, the soles worn thin. I noticed that she never ordered coffee anymore, just water with lemon. I asked her if she was okay. She always smiled and said, "Never better, Dr. Simmons." But the math did not add up. I knew how much nurses made. I knew how much my dorm cost. The crash came during the spring semester of my junior year. I was in the middle of preparing for the medical college admission test. My phone rang at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. I saw the caller ID, Janine Mercer. Janine never called on Tuesday mornings. She knew my schedule. I answered, my heart instantly hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Janine, what is wrong?" "Kara," Janine said, her voice tight. "I am at the hospital. It is Tessa." The world stopped. The library vanished. "Is she—" I could not even finish the sentence. "She collapsed at work," Janine said quickly. "She fainted in the hallway between patient rooms. They have her on fluids. It is, Kara, it is exhaustion. Severe dehydration and exhaustion. I was in my car 5 minutes later. The drive from Lakeview to the hospital took 40 minutes. But I made it in 25. I ran through the parking lot, ignoring the heavy backpack slapping against my spine. When I got to her room, she was sleeping. She looked small in the hospital bed. Her skin the color of old parchment. An IV line was taped to her hand, the same hand that had held mine through 100 blood draws. I sat down in the chair, the visitor's chair, and I looked at the chart hanging at the foot of the bed. I read the admission notes. Syncope, secondary to overexertion. Patient reports working 14 consecutive days. Patient reports averaging 4 hours of sleep. 14 days. Consecutive. She had been picking up every overtime shift available. She had been working double shifts on weekends. She had been destroying herself to keep her promise that I would not have to worry about money. I sat there and watched her sleep for an hour. I felt a different kind of heartbreak than the one I had felt at 13. That was the heartbreak of being unwanted. This was the heartbreak of being loved too much. She was killing herself to build a pedestal for me to stand on. When she woke up, she tried to sit up immediately, her instinct to be the nurse kicking in. "I am fine," she croaked. "Trying to pull the IV tape. I just forgot to eat breakfast. I need to get back to the floor." I stood up and put a hand on her shoulder, gently pushing her back down. "You are not going anywhere," I said, "and you are certainly not going back to work." "Kara," she argued weakly, "the tuition payment is due next month, the housing deposit. I do not care." I cut her off. I pulled a folder out of my backpack. It was not schoolwork. It was a financial plan I had drafted in the waiting room. "We are changing the deal," I said. Tessa looked at me, her eyes wide and glassy. "What are you talking about? I am not a child anymore. Tessa, I am 21 years old. I am not going to let you work yourself into an early grave so I can have a single room and a meal plan." I opened the folder. "I went to the financial aid office while you were sleeping." I lied. I did not go. But I knew the website by heart. I am applying to be a resident assistant for senior year. That covers my housing and food completely. It means I have to deal with freshman drama at 2 in the morning, but it saves us $12,000. Tessa opened her mouth to protest, but I kept going, and I spoke to Dr. Thorne. He has a grant for undergraduate researchers. It is a stipend. It is not a fortune, but it covers my books and fees. "Kara, you need to focus on your studies," Tessa whispered. "You cannot work and—" "I can," I said fiercely. "I am the daughter of Tessa Alvarez. I know how to work." I took her hand. It felt frail. "You saved me." "Mom," I said, using the word that I usually saved for private moments. "You pulled me out of the fire. But if you burned down while trying to keep me warm, then none of this matters. I am not doing this without you. Do you hear me? I am not walking across that graduation stage if you are not in the audience because you had a heart attack working a triple shift." Tessa looked at me. A single tear slid down her cheek, tracking through the exhaustion. "I just wanted you to have the best," she whispered. "I have the best." I said, "I have you." We made a new pact that day in the hospital room. Tessa agreed to cut her hours back to a standard 40-hour week. No more overtime. I took the resident assistant job. I got the research stipend. My senior year was harder. I was tired. I was balancing rounds in the dorms with rounds in the lab. I was grading papers for Dr. Thorne while trying to study for my own exams. But strangely, my grades did not suffer. They improved. I was not running on fear anymore. I was running on purpose. Every time I felt like quitting, I thought of Tessa in that hospital bed, and I found a reserve of energy I did not know I had. I was paying her back, hour by hour, grade by grade. The acceptance letter from Stonebridge School of Medicine arrived in December. It was the Reach School, the Dream School, the place where the textbooks were written. I opened the email on my phone while sitting in the chaotic common room of the freshman dorm I supervised. "Dear Ms. Simmons, we are pleased to inform you." I stopped reading. I did not scream. I closed my eyes and let the feeling wash over me. It was a warm, golden wave of relief. Then I read the second paragraph. In light of your exceptional research on adolescent trauma and your academic record, the admissions committee has awarded you the Dean's Research Fellowship. This fellowship includes a full tuition waiver and a living stipend for all 4 years of study. Full tuition. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. It was done. The debt was paid. Tessa would never have to work an extra shift again. I called her. She was at home, cooking dinner. "Mom," I said. "Yeah, honey," she answered. I got in. Stonebridge. I heard her drop a spoon. "Oh my God, Kara, that is incredible. And Mom," I added, my voice trembling, "it is free." They gave me a full ride. The silence on the other end of the line was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Then, I heard a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "We did it," she whispered. "Yeah," I said. "We did." The spring of my senior year was a victory lap. My research was published in a respectable undergraduate journal. The local newspaper in Dayton ran a small profile on me. Local student overcomes chronic illness to earn top medical scholarship. It was a puff piece. It talked about my resilience, my hard work. It mentioned Tessa as my guardian and inspiration. It did not mention Elaine or Grant Simmons by name, but it mentioned my background as a former ward of the state who found stability through the foster system. It was a digital footprint, a signal flare sent up into the internet. I graduated in May. The ceremony was beautiful. Tessa was there, looking rested, wearing a new dress I had bought her with my first stipend check. We took photos. We laughed. We went out for an expensive dinner and ordered dessert. For the first time in my life, the future looked like a straight, smooth road. I was going to be Dr. Simmons. I was going to change lives. I was safe. 3 weeks later, I was in my new apartment near the medical school, unpacking boxes. I had my laptop open on the counter, refreshing my email, waiting for the orientation schedule. A new message pinged into my inbox. It was from a Gmail address I did not recognize. Simmons Family Trust, 1998@gmail.com. My hands froze over the keyboard. The air in the apartment seemed to drop 20 degrees. I knew that year, 1998, the year I was born. I stared at the subject line. It was 3 words, 3 simple words that carried the weight of 15 years of silence. "We need to talk." I did not open it immediately. I sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, feeling the ghost of the little girl who had waited in the hospital room. She was scared. But I was not that little girl anymore. I was a woman who had built herself from scrap metal and sheer will. I was a woman who had a red binder in the closet and a mother who would walk through fire for her. I reached for my phone and texted Tessa a screenshot of the inbox. They found me. I typed. Tessa's reply came 10 seconds later. "Don't open it yet. I'm coming over. Put the kettle on." I looked at the screen one last time. They wanted to talk. After 8 years of silence, after the tax fraud, after the abandonment, they wanted to talk. They had seen the news. They had seen the scholarship. They had seen the success. And like sharks sensing blood in the water, they were circling. I stood up and walked to the closet. I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down the heavy red binder. I blew the dust off the cover. "We need to talk?" I thought, feeling a cold, sharp smile touch my lips. "No, you need to talk. I just need to listen. And then, I am going to destroy you." Tessa arrived 10 minutes later with a box of herbal tea and a look on her face that could have stripped paint off a wall. She did not say a word as she walked into my apartment. She simply locked the door behind her, checked the deadbolt, and then marched into the kitchen to put the kettle on. We sat at my small dining table, the laptop screen glowing between us like a radioactive isotope. The subject line, "We need to talk," stared back at us. "Open it," Tessa said. Setting a steaming mug in front of me, we do not hide from monsters in this family. We turn on the lights and see how big they really are. I clicked the mouse. The email expanded. It was written by Elaine. I knew it instantly. It had her cadence, her breathless way of stringing sentences together to create a narrative where she was the tragic heroine of every situation. "Kara, my darling, I saw the article in the Dayton Daily News. A friend sent it to me. I almost dropped my phone. You look so beautiful. You look exactly like me when I was your age. I know you are probably confused why we have not reached out sooner. The truth is, we wanted to, every single day. But the lawyers and the social workers, they all told us it would be better for you if we stayed away. They said you needed space to heal. We were just listening to the experts. Kara, we were so young back then, and so terrified. When Dr. Klein told us about your condition, we were paralyzed. We thought the state had resources we did not have. We thought we were giving you a better chance. God, looking back, we were just naive children ourselves. But seeing you now, seeing what a brilliant woman you have become, I know we made the right sacrifice. You are strong because you had to be. We gave you that strength. In a way, I am writing because things have changed. Life has been very hard on us lately. Kara, your father's business took a hit during the recession and never really recovered. And Madison, well, Madison is going through a terrible time. The family is fragile right now. We need each other. We need to be whole again. Please, honey, let us explain properly. Let us be a family. We miss you. Love, Mom. I finished reading and sat back, feeling a wave of physical nausea that started in my stomach and rose to my throat. It was a masterclass in rewriting history. She had managed to frame their abandonment as a sacrifice. She had blamed the experts for their silence, and then, in the final paragraph, she had played her hand. Life has been very hard. The family is fragile. They were broke. Tessa read the email over my shoulder. She let out a short, sharp laugh that had no humor in it. Naive children, Tessa repeated, shaking her head. They were 40 years old. Kara, they had a lawyer and an accountant. They were not naive. They were calculated. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message. The number was unknown, but the area code was familiar. I picked it up. You are a grown woman now. Stop acting like a hurt child. Your mother is crying. You turned out fine, didn't you? We did what we had to do. Don't be spiteful. It doesn't suit a doctor. Call us. Dad. I looked at the screen. Grant Simmons. He did not even have the grace to pretend to be sorry. He was commanding me to forgive them because my success was inconvenient to his guilt. You turned out fine, as if my survival was proof that their cruelty was harmless. I handed the phone to Tessa. She read it and looked like she wanted to throw the device through the window. They are not sorry, I said, my voice sounding surprisingly steady in the quiet room. No, Tessa said, sitting down heavily. They are fishing. They see a successful medical student with a full-ride scholarship and a bright future. And they see an asset. They see a retirement plan. I called Janine. She was no longer my caseworker. I had aged out of the system years ago, but she was family. She picked up on the second ring. I read her the email and the text. Janine hummed on the other end of the line. It was her I am analyzing the data hum. The timing is specific. Janine said, Kara, have you looked up your sister lately? Madison? I asked, No, I haven't thought about Madison in years. Do me a favor. Janine said, Google her name, right now. I opened a new tab on my browser. I typed in Madison Simmons, Ohio. The search results flooded the screen. My jaw dropped. Top. Result: PR firm, Lux Image, files for bankruptcy amidst fraud allegations. Second result: Madison Simmons, founder of Lux Image, sued by influencers for breach of contract. Third result: foreclosure notice for Bexley property linked to Simmons' family. I clicked on the first article. It was dated 4 months ago. Madison had started a boutique public relations firm that promised to get aspiring influencers brand deals. She had taken huge retainers up front and delivered nothing. She was being sued for over $200,000. Her assets were frozen. And because Grant had likely co-signed for her business loans, because Madison was the golden child, the one they bet on, they were going down with her. I looked up at Tessa. They are drowning, I whispered. Madison got sued for fraud. The house is in foreclosure. Tessa's expression shifted from anger to understanding. So the investment failed. She said, They poured everything into the healthy daughter, the one who was supposed to be the star, and she crashed. So now they are looking for the backup generator. Me, I said. Janine's voice came through the speakerphone. Tinny but sharp. This is a resource extraction mission. Kara. They are not looking for a daughter. They are looking for a lifeline. They think you are young, naive, and desperate for parental approval. They think they can swoop in, flatter you, and guilt you into opening your wallet. I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the same feeling I had in the anatomy lab when I made the first incision. The fear was gone. Now, I was just looking at the pathology. I am not going to reply. I said, "Not yet." "Good." Janine said, "Do not give them anything. Silence is the one thing they cannot manipulate." But silence, it turned out, only made them louder. Over the next 2 weeks, the encirclement began. They realized I was not going to respond to a direct assault, so they began to attack the perimeter. It started with a Facebook message to my roommate from freshman year. Elaine messaged her, playing the role of the distraught mother. "I am so worried about Kara. I lost her number. Can you please help a mother reconnect with her baby?" Then it was a LinkedIn connection request to Dr. Thorne, my research mentor. Grant requested to connect with him, adding a note. "Proud father of your star student. Would love to discuss her future. Doctor." Thorne showed it to me after a seminar, looking confused. "I thought you said you were estranged," he said gently. "We are," I told him, mortified. "Please ignore him. He is just trying to establish ownership." Then came the phone calls to the neighbors in Huber Heights. People who had known Tessa for 20 years. Elaine called them, fishing for information about where I lived, what kind of car I drove, if I was seeing anyone. They were trying to shame me into submission. They were creating a narrative in my social circle that I was the cruel, ungrateful daughter who was icing out her loving parents. They were weaponizing their worry. I sat in my apartment one evening, surrounded by textbooks, feeling the walls closing in. It was a violation. I was 22 years old. I was top of my class. I was an adult, and yet I felt like that 13-year-old girl again, helpless as they discussed my fate over my head. Tessa and Janine came over for an emergency war council. "We need a cease and desist," Janine said, slamming her hand on the table. "This is harassment. I can draft a letter on official legal letterhead. We can threaten a restraining order. We can cite the tax fraud investigation. That will shut them up." Tessa nodded in agreement. "I agree. We need to build a wall." "Kara, a legal wall. You cannot study for your boards with this hanging over you." I looked at the two of them, my defenders, my real family. They wanted to protect me. They wanted to hide me away safely behind legal documents and silence. But as I looked at the pile of printed screenshots, the messages to my friends, the emails to my professors, I realized something. A cease and desist letter is private. It is a secret war. If I sent it, they would stop, maybe, but they would still go around telling people that I was crazy, that I was cruel, that I had legally attacked them for no reason. They would still own the story. They would still be the victims in the eyes of the world, and I was tired of letting them write the story. "No," I said. Janine paused, her pen hovering over her legal pad. "No what?" "No cease and desist," I said. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the campus lights. "Kara," Tessa said warningly, "you cannot engage with them. That is what they want." I turned around. I do not want to engage with them. I want to expose them. I walked back to the table. "If I send a lawyer," I said, "I am fighting on their terms. They love secrets. They love backroom deals. That is how they operated when they left me at the hospital. That is how they operated with the tax returns. They thrive in the dark." I picked up Grant's text message. "Don't be spiteful. It doesn't suit a doctor. He thinks I am afraid of a scene," I said softly. "He thinks I am so obsessed with my reputation that I will pay them off just to keep them quiet. He thinks shame is a weapon that only he can use." I looked at Tessa. "You told me once that justice is not always a courtroom," I said. "You told me that sometimes. Justice is just turning on the lights." Tessa's eyes widened. She remembered. What are you planning? Kara, Janine asked slowly. I am planning to give them exactly what they asked for. I said, they want a relationship? They want to be seen as the proud parents of the successful doctor? Fine, I will give them a front row seat. I am not following. Janine said, they love an audience. I explained, they live for the applause. That is why they froze in the hospital when the doctor challenged them, because he was an audience. That is why they are messaging my professors, because they want validation from important people. I took a deep breath. If they want to be on stage, I will put them on stage. But this time, they do not get to write the script. Just then, my laptop pinged. I glanced at the screen. It was an email from the Student Affairs Committee at Stonebridge School of Medicine. Subject: Graduation Ceremony. Honorary Speaker Nomination. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of dramatic timing. I clicked it open. Dear Kara, it is our distinct honor to inform you that you have been selected by the faculty and your peers to be the class speaker for the graduation ceremony this May. Your academic excellence, combined with your inspiring personal journey, makes you the ideal candidate to represent the values of our institution. We would need a draft of your speech by April 15th. Sincerely, the committee. I stared at the words, inspiring personal journey. They meant the sanitized version. The version where I overcame adversity, the version where the system worked. But I looked at Tessa, the woman who had sold her sleep to buy my books. I looked at Janine, the woman who had fought the bureaucracy for me. And then I thought about Elaine and Grant, sitting in their foreclosure, plotting to harvest my success. I looked at Tessa. I just got asked to be the graduation speaker. I said. Tessa gasped. Kara, that is amazing. Is it, I asked, or is it the perfect trap? I sat down and started typing a reply to the committee. I accept. Then I looked at Janine. Do not send the cease and desist. I said. Then what do we do? Janine asked. We wait. I said. And when the invitations for graduation go out, I want you to send them 2 VIP tickets. Janine dropped her pen. You cannot be serious. You want them there. I want them in the front row. I said, I want them to wear their best clothes. I want them to think they have won. I want them to think I have forgiven them and that I am welcoming them back into the fold to share in my glory. But why? Tessa asked, her voice trembling. Why give them that satisfaction? Because, I said, my voice cold and hard as a scalpel. When I stand up at that podium, and the cameras are rolling, and the whole world is watching, I am going to tell the truth. Not the polite version, the real version. I looked at the red binder on my shelf. I am going to read the minutes of the meeting, I said, and I want them to be sitting 5 feet away from me when I do it. Tessa looked at me. She saw the change. The little girl who cried for her parents was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned that the only way to stop a monster is to drag it into the sun. She slowly smiled, a fierce, proud smile. Make sure they have a parking pass, Tessa said. We would not want them to be late, the week before graduation. The air in my apartment felt thin, charged with the static of an approaching storm. I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the dark circles under my eyes. I was not studying for finals. I had aced my clinical rotations months ago. I was writing a speech. Being selected as the valedictorian was an honor. But for me, it was a tactical advantage. It gave me a microphone. It gave me a captive audience. And most importantly, it gave me a platform that Elaine and Grant Simmons could not resist. I had written 12 drafts. The first 11 were safe. They were filled with the usual platitudes about resilience, the nobility of medicine, and the bright future ahead. They were the kind of speeches that parents filmed on their phones and forgot about by dinner. But the 12th draft was different. I was constructing it like a Trojan horse. On the surface, it was a meditation on the Hippocratic Oath, specifically the commitment to do no harm and the physician's duty to the truth. But underneath the academic language, hidden inside the anecdotes about patient care, was a razor-sharp narrative about abandonment, I had to be careful. If I was too explicit too early, the administration would cut my mic. If I was too vague, the targets would miss the point. I needed to thread the needle perfectly. I needed to speak in a code that everyone would understand by the time I reached the final sentence. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was an email from Sarah Jenkins, the event coordinator for the graduation ceremony. Subject: VIP seating finalization. Dear Kara, we are finalizing the seating chart for the front rows. You have currently listed Ms. Tessa Alvarez and Ms. Janine Mercer as your primary guests. You still have 2 slots available in your allotted VIP block. I wanted to let you know that we received a call from a Mr. and Mrs. Grant Simmons. They identified themselves as your parents and requested seating in the family section. Since you did not include them on your initial list, I wanted to confirm your preference. Should I release the extra seats to them? Or would you prefer security handle the request? I stared at the screen. They had called. Of course they had. They were not waiting for an invitation. They were demanding one. They assumed that their biological connection was a VIP pass that never expired. I picked up my phone and dialed Tessa. She answered on the first ring, the background noise of the hospital cafeteria humming behind her. "Hey, baby," she said. "Everything okay?" "They called the school," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Elaine and Grant, they are trying to get seats in the front row." The line went quiet. I could hear Tessa's breathing change. A sharp intake of air. The coordinator is asking me what to do. I continued. She offered to have security turn them away. "Kara," Tessa said slowly, "you do not have to do this. You can have a nice, normal graduation. You can let them stay in the parking lot. You do not have to turn your big day into a battlefield." I looked at the red binder sitting on the corner of my desk. I thought about the tax fraud. I thought about the silence. I thought about the audacity of them showing up now, when the hard work was done, to claim the trophy. If I turn them away, I said, they become the victims. They will go home and tell everyone that their heartless daughter banned them from her graduation. They will cry crocodile tears and get sympathy. And if you let them in, Tessa asked. If I let them in, I said, my voice hardening, they have to sit there and listen. They have to sit 5 feet away from me while I tell the world exactly what a family is, and what it is not. Tessa paused. I knew she was weighing the risks. She was always protective, always the shield, but she also knew that I was not a child anymore. I was a surgeon in training. I knew how to cut. It is your call. Kara, she said finally, if you want them there, then let them come. But I am sitting right next to you until you go up on that stage. And if they try to speak to you, I will handle it. Thank you. Mom, I said. I hung up and typed a reply to Sarah. Dear Sarah, please release the 2 VIP seats to Mr. and Mrs. Simmons. They may sit in the front row, adjacent to Ms. Alvarez. I hit send. The trap was set. The next morning, I had a meeting with Dr. Mason Klein. He was no longer just the attending physician at Redwood Children's Center. He was now the chief of pediatrics and a guest lecturer at Stonebridge. He had been one of the people who nominated me for the speaker position, though he had been discreet about our shared history during my time in med school. I walked into his office. It smelled of old books and mahogany, a stark contrast to the sterile hospital room where we had first met 15 years ago. Kara, he said, standing up to shake my hand, or should I say, Dr. Simmons. Not quite yet. I smiled. 4 more days. He gestured for me to sit. I heard you are giving the commencement address. That is a significant honor. I sat down, clutching my backpack. Inside was the red binder. Dr. Klein, I said, I need to ask you for a favor, a professional one. He looked at me over his glasses. Anything. You were one of the best students I have ever had on rotation. I pulled the binder out. I opened it to the very first section. The admission records from Redwood Children's Center, January 28th, 2011. Do you remember this day? I asked. He looked at the document. His face changed. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a somber, professional mask. He touched the paper with a finger. I remember. He said quietly, I remember it very well. It is not often I see parents negotiate a surrender of custody like they are selling a used car. I need you to write something for me. I said, I am compiling a record, a statement of fact. I need a professional attestation regarding the medical necessity of the guardianship. I need you to confirm, in writing, that my parents were fully informed that their departure would result in state custody, and that they chose to leave anyway. Doctor, Klein leaned back in his chair. He looked at me for a long time. Is this for a legal proceeding? He asked. It is for my peace of mind. I said, and potentially, yes, they are back. Doctor, Klein, they are trying to claim that they were forced out, that the hospital and the state conspired to take me away. His eyes narrowed. That is a lie. He said firmly, I was there. I gave them 3 different options for home care. They rejected all of them. Will you put that on letterhead? I asked. He pulled a notepad toward him. I will have it for you by this afternoon. You will have a notarized affidavit stating that the transfer of custody was a voluntary action initiated by the parents against medical advice regarding the emotional well-being of the child. Thank you, I whispered. That afternoon, I met Janine at a coffee shop near campus. She handed me a thick manila envelope. This is everything, she said. I opened it. It was a timeline, a chronological map of my abandonment. January 25th, 2011. Grant Simmons contacts billing department regarding liability waivers. January 28th, 2011. Kara Simmons admitted. Guardianship transfer papers signed at 4:15 p.m. February 2nd, 2011. Elaine Simmons flies to Aspen. Flight manifest confirmed. Janine had dug deep. She had found the flight records. While I was lying in a hospital bed wondering why my mother hadn't come back with my pajamas. She was flying first class to a ski resort, but there was something else in the envelope, a printout from a Facebook group called Dayton Society Moms. You need to see this, Janine said, sliding the paper across the table. I looked at the printout. It was a post from Elaine, dated 3 days ago. So proud of my baby girl graduating as valedictorian from Stonebridge Medical. It has been such a long, hard road. We had to make so many difficult choices to get her the best care possible when she was sick. The system tried to keep us apart, but a mother's love never fails. Can't wait to see her shine. Proud mom survivor. Family first. My blood turned to ice. The system tried to keep us apart. She was doing it. She was rewriting the story in real time. She was painting herself as the victim of a cruel bureaucracy, a mother who had been forcibly separated from her child and had fought to get her back. She was erasing Tessa. She was erasing Janine. She was erasing the truth. They are not just coming to the graduation to look good. I realized, my voice trembling with rage. They are coming to launch their comeback tour. They are going to use my stage to validate their lie. Janine nodded. They are spinning a narrative where they are the heroes who sacrificed custody to save your life. It is brilliant, actually. It covers their tracks and makes them look noble. I crumpled the paper in my fist. If I let them sit there and smile. I said, I am complicit. If I do not say anything, I am signing off on their version of history. So what is the plan? Janine asked. You have the affidavit from Klein. You have the timeline. Do you want to publish it? No. I said. I stood up. I am going to stick to the plan. They want to talk about difficult choices? Fine. I will talk about them. I went back to my apartment. I locked the door. I turned off my phone. I opened the document on my laptop labeled graduation_speech_draft_12. I read it through. It was good. It was powerful. But it was still too polite. It was a scalpel. But I needed a hammer. I started typing. I wove the timeline into the narrative. I did not use their names. I did not need to. Everyone in that room would know who I was talking about by the time I finished. I took the text of Dr. Klein's affidavit and paraphrased it into a meditation on responsibility. I took the flight records to Aspen and turned them into a metaphor for priorities. I wrote until my fingers ached. I wrote until the sun came up over the campus skyline. When I was finished, I read it aloud to the empty room. My voice shook on the first paragraph. But by the end, it was steady. It was the voice of the doctor I was about to become. Clinical, precise, unafraid of the blood. I saved the file. I did not call it Draft 13. I renamed it simply Truth. I closed the laptop. 2 days later, the dress rehearsal was held in the massive auditorium. I stood at the podium, looking out at the thousands of empty seats. I visualized where they would be. Front row, center, right where they wanted to be. I visualized Elaine in her expensive outfit, waiting for the camera to pan to her. I visualized Grant, checking his watch, calculating the ROI of his appearance. And then I visualized Tessa, sitting next to them, the woman who had given up her sleep, her career advancement, and her comfort to save me. This speech was not for me, it was for her. It was the public acknowledgement she had never asked for, but deserved more than anyone. As I walked off the stage, Sarah, the coordinator, caught up with me. "Kara," she said, clutching her clipboard, "everything is set. The Simmons family is confirmed for the front row." "Oh, and your mother called again." "My mother?" I asked, stiffening. "Yes, Mrs. Simmons. She wanted to know if there would be a reception afterwards where she could take photos with the dean. She mentioned something about wanting to get a family portrait for the press release." I stopped walking. I looked at Sarah. "Tell her yes," I said. "Tell her there will be plenty of photos. Tell her I'm looking forward to it." Sarah smiled, oblivious. "That is so sweet. It is going to be such a special day for you all." I watched her walk away. A press release. They were treating my graduation like a product launch. They had probably already drafted the caption. Lux Image founder Madison Simmons and family celebrate sister's medical triumph. They were going to use my face to rehabilitate their brand. I felt a cold resolve settle in my gut. It was not anger anymore. It was something cleaner. It was the absolute certainty of a diagnosis. They were a cancer, and I was the surgeon. I went home and laid out my clothes for the ceremony. The doctoral gown, the velvet hood, and underneath, the simple silver ring Tessa had given me when I was 13. I texted Tessa one last time. "It is done. The speech is locked." She replied instantly, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we take out the trash." I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the little girl in the hospital bed in Dayton, waiting for parents who never came. I whispered to her in the dark, "You do not have to wait anymore. I am here, and I'm going to make sure no one ever forgets what happened to you." I closed my eyes. The stage was set. The players were in position. And I had the only script that mattered. The morning of the ceremony arrived with a sky the color of slate, heavy and gray, pressing down on the city of Columbus. It was the kind of weather that usually made my joints ache, a phantom reminder of the sickness that used to rule my life. But today, I felt nothing. My body was a machine, calibrated for a single purpose. I stood in front of the mirror in the staging room, adjusting the velvet hood of my doctoral gown. The heavy fabric settled on my shoulders like a mantle of armor. My hands were cold. I rubbed them together, feeling the friction. But the chill was not from the air conditioning. It was the physiological response to imminent combat. My heart rate was slow, dangerously slow. I checked my reflection. The woman staring back at me was not the terrified 13-year-old girl shivering in a hospital gown. She was not the exhausted student studying by candlelight. She was Dr. Kara Simmons, and she was about to perform the most delicate incision of her career. The Schottenstein Center was already vibrating with noise, even from the back hallways. I could hear the hum of 18,000 people, families, friends, faculty, creating a wall of sound that usually signaled celebration. To me, it sounded like the roar of a coliseum waiting for the spectacle. We began the procession, the line of medical graduates, draped in green and black, moved like a river through the concrete tunnels. I was at the front, as the valedictorian. I led the column. This meant I would be the first to walk onto the floor, the first to be seen, and the first to pass the VIP section. I walked with my head high, my eyes fixed on the middle distance. I had practiced this walk. It was the walk of a surgeon entering the operating theater, confident, detached, and absolute. As we emerged from the tunnel and into the cavernous bowl of the arena, the lights hit us. They were blindingly bright, hot white spotlights that cut through the haze. The applause swelled, a physical force that hit my chest. I kept walking, left, right, and then I saw them. The VIP section was a cordoned-off area in the very first row, directly to the right of the center aisle. It was the prime real estate of the arena, reserved for the most important donors and the families of the top honorees. Elaine and Grant Simmons were sitting there. Seeing them in the flesh after 15 years was a jarring optical illusion in my memory. In the nightmares that had plagued my teenage years, they were giants. They were towering figures of authority and judgment. But sitting there in the harsh arena lighting, they looked small. They looked ordinary. Elaine was wearing a cream-colored suit that I instantly recognized as a Chanel knockoff. It was well-tailored, but the fabric lacked the heavy, expensive drape of the real thing. She had aged. Her neck was looser, her makeup applied with a heavier hand to cover the lines of stress. She was clutching a program so tightly that her knuckles were white. Her eyes darting around the arena as if she were calculating the net worth of the room. Grant sat beside her, looking bored. He was checking his phone. His posture slumped. He wore a suit that was 5 years out of style, a subtle indicator of their financial decline that only someone looking closely would notice. But he still had that sneer, that permanent expression of a man who believed he was owed better service than the world was providing. They looked like tourists in a life they could no longer afford. As I drew closer, walking down the center aisle, Elaine spotted me. Her reaction was immediate and performative. She gasped, a theatrical hand flying to her chest. She nudged Grant, who looked up and straightened his tie. Elaine started to rise from her seat. A wide, trembling smile plastered on her face. She raised her hand to wave, preparing to enact the scene of the tearful reunion for the benefit of the people sitting around her. She wanted the cameras to see it. She wanted the neighbors to see it. She wanted to claim the moment before I even reached the stage. And then, she stopped. She froze mid-rise, her knees bent, her hand half raised in a grotesque parody of a greeting. She had seen who was sitting in the seat directly next to her. Tessa Alvarez was sitting in seat A1. Elaine was in seat A2. Tessa was not looking at Elaine. She was not looking at Grant. She was looking straight at me, her face glowing with a pride so pure it seemed to burn the air around her. She was wearing her navy blue dress, her shoulders back, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She looked regal. She looked like she belonged there. Elaine looked from me to Tessa, and then back to me. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The woman sitting next to her, the woman she had likely assumed was just another guest, was the woman who had raised her daughter, the woman who had picked up the pieces she had dropped. Elaine slowly sank back into her seat. The smile faltered, twitching at the corners. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, creating a barrier. She realized, in that split second, that she had not walked into a celebration. She had walked into a territory dispute, and she was unarmed. I did not break stride. I walked right past them. I was close enough to smell Elaine's perfume, a floral scent that was too sweet, too cloying. I was close enough to hear Grant clear his throat, a guttural sound of discomfort. I did not look at them. I did not acknowledge the wave. I stared straight ahead, my profile carved from stone. I let the silence between us stretch and snap. By ignoring them, I denied them the oxygen they needed to ignite their drama. I reduced them to spectators. But as I passed the end of the row, my peripheral vision caught something else, a figure standing in the shadows of the entry tunnel. Just behind the VIP rail, it was Madison, my sister, the golden child. She was not sitting with them. There was an empty chair on the other side of Grant. presumably for her, but she had chosen not to take it. She was standing against the concrete wall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked thin, gaunt even. Her blonde hair, usually perfect, was pulled back in a severe, messy knot. She was wearing a trench coat that looked too big for her, as if she were trying to hide inside it. She was not looking at the stage. She was looking at me. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I expected to see hate. I expected to see the same arrogance that had allowed her to text about a mall trip while I was being diagnosed with a life-altering illness. I expected her to sneer at my success, to be jealous that the spare had outshined the heir. But there was no hate in Madison's eyes. There was fear. It was a raw, primal terror. Madison was a PR specialist. She knew how stories worked. She knew how optics worked. She saw the setup, the parents in the front row, the discarded daughter at the podium, the cameras rolling. She had spent the last 6 months drowning in a fraud scandal of her own making, and she had developed a sixth sense for disaster. She knew, looking at my face, that I was not here to play nice. She knew that her parents had walked into a trap, and she was smart enough to stay out of the blast radius. She did not wave. She just stared at me, her eyes wide, silently pleading, "Do not do it." Her eyes seemed to say, or maybe, "Please do it." I could not tell. I looked away and kept walking. I took my seat on the stage, in the row of high-backed chairs reserved for the speakers and the deans. From my vantage point, the arena was a sea of faces, but my focus was narrowed to that single row of seats in the front. The ceremony dragged on, the opening remarks, the invocation, the welcome from the university president. It was a blur of academic pomp and circumstance. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded over the speech in my lap. The truth, the pages felt hot against my fingers. Down in the front row, the dynamic was shifting. I watched it like a hawk. Tessa was chatting with the woman on her left, the mother of the salutatorian. She was laughing, relaxed. She was radiating the ease of someone with a clear conscience. Elaine and Grant, however, were disintegrating. Grant kept checking his watch, then checking his phone, then whispering angrily to Elaine. Elaine was fidgeting. She kept smoothing her skirt, touching her hair, adjusting her collar. She looked like she wanted to crawl out of her skin. Every time the camera jib, a long mechanical arm carrying a television camera, swooped over the crowd, Elaine would jerk her head up and flash a manic, terrified smile. Terrified she would be caught looking miserable, but equally terrified of being seen at all. They were realizing, minute by minute, that they had made a mistake. They were realizing that the VIP treatment was a spotlight, and spotlights reveal flaws. Then came the community awards. The Dean of Student Affairs stepped up to the microphone. At Stonebridge, we believe that medicine is a community effort. She said, "No doctor stands alone. Behind every graduate here today is a support system. Parents, partners, mentors, who sacrifice time, sleep, and resources to help them reach this finish line." The crowd applauded politely. We would like to recognize a few individuals who have gone above and beyond in supporting our students. The dean continued. I held my breath. I had not requested this. This was not part of my plan. The dean read a few names, and then she paused. We also want to acknowledge Ms. Tessa Alvarez, she said, her voice clear. Ms. Alvarez is not only a dedicated nurse in our community, but has been the sole guardian and support for our valedictorian, tirelessly advocating for patient rights and modeling the very best of caregiving. The applause was thunderous. The students knew me. They knew Tessa. They had seen her drop off food during finals week. They had seen her at the white coat ceremony. They cheered for her because she was genuine. Tessa looked surprised. She covered her mouth with her hand, blushing, and gave a small, humble wave. But the real show was in seat A2. Elaine stiffened as if she had been electrocuted. The word sole guardian hung in the air like toxic smoke. The people around them, the other parents, the donors, turned to look at Tessa, beaming at her, clapping for her. And then, inevitably, Their gazes slid to the people sitting right next to her. They looked at Elaine and Grant. The confusion was visible on their faces. Wait. The neighbor's expressions seemed to say, "If she is the sole guardian, who are you?" Elaine shrank. She physically recoiled from the applause. She stared straight ahead, her face burning a blotchy red. Grant looked down at his shoes. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. They were being erased in real time. The narrative they had tried to build, the loving family reunited, was being dismantled by the simple reality of Tessa's presence. They were sitting in the front row, but they were miles away from the glory. I watched them squirm, and I felt a cold, hard satisfaction. This was the appetizer. The main course was yet to come. The ceremony moved to the presentation of the candidates. Row by row, students crossed the stage. I watched the clock. The time was approaching. Finally, the dean of the medical school, Dr. Harrison, returned to the podium. The room quieted down. The air grew heavy with anticipation. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The valedictory address. I stood up. I walked to the center of the stage. The podium was heavy, made of oak, bearing the seal of the university. I placed my speech on the stand. I looked out at the lights. I adjusted the microphone. I looked down. The camera operator, a man in a black headset operating the jib, received a cue in his earpiece. I saw him nod. He swung the massive camera arm around. It hovered, low and predatory, directly over the VIP section. It was framing the shot, the family reaction shot. It was standard broadcast procedure. When the valedictorian speaks, you show the weeping, proud parents. The image from the camera appeared on the massive jumbotron screen suspended above the center of the arena. There they were, 40 feet high. Elaine looked up at herself on the screen. She saw the fear in her own eyes magnified for 18,000 people to see. She tried to smile, but her lip caught on her dry teeth. She looked like a trapped animal. Grant looked like he was calculating the exit velocity needed to sprint to the parking lot. They were trapped. They could not leave. If they stood up and walked out now, with the camera right on them, they would be pariahs. They would be the parents who walked out on their daughter's speech. They had to stay. They had to take it. I leaned into the microphone. My voice did not shake. Dean Harrison stepped up beside me to do the formal introduction. He was a man of tradition. He loved the pomp. He loved the emotional beats. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming, "we now come to the highlight of our ceremony. It is my distinct privilege to introduce a young woman who embodies the resilience, the intelligence, and the compassion that this institution stands for." He paused. "Dr. Kara Simmons." The applause started, but he held up a hand. He was not done. "Kara's journey to this stage has not been easy," he said. "She has overcome significant health challenges. She has overcome systemic barriers. But she did not do it alone." I saw Elaine perk up slightly. She heard, "did not do it alone." She thought, "This is it. This is the part where he mentions the family." She straightened her spine, readying herself to accept the credit she had not earned. Dean Harrison smiled warmly. "We have a tradition here at Stonebridge," he said. "We believe that when a student rises, their village rises with them." The camera zoomed in tighter on the VIP row. It was so tight I could see the sweat beading on Grant's forehead. Elaine was breathing shallowly. She was preparing to stand. She was preparing to wave. She was preparing to be the mother she had pretended to be on Facebook. And now, Dean Harrison said, turning to look directly at the front row, before Dr. Simmons speaks, "I would like to invite the people who made this moment possible to share in this recognition." He looked at me, then back at the crowd. "Will the family of the valedictorian please stand?" he commanded. The silence that followed was absolute. It lasted only a second, but it felt like an hour. In the front row, Elaine's muscles fired. Her instinct, honed by years of social climbing, screamed at her to stand up. She shifted her weight to her feet. She started to lift herself off the cushion, but then, her eyes locked with mine. I was standing at the podium, looking directly down at her. I was not smiling. I was not crying. I was looking at her with the cold, clinical detachment of a coroner determining a cause of death. Stand up. My eyes dared her. Stand up and claim this. And see what happens next. She saw the red binder in my mind. She saw the dates. She saw the truth sitting on the podium in front of me. She froze. She hovered there, inches off the seat, caught between her greed and her terror. And while she was frozen, paralyzed by the sudden realization that she had walked into an execution. The person next to her moved. Tessa Alvarez stood up. She stood up slowly, gracefully, without hesitation. She did not look at Elaine. She did not look at Grant. She looked only at me. She stood tall in her navy blue dress, her hands clasped, tears streaming down her face, beaming with the love of 1,000 suns. The camera, confused by the conflicting movements, widened its shot on the giant screen. The audience saw the truth. They saw one woman standing tall, radiating love and pride, and they saw two people sitting next to her, half-crouched, frozen in a posture of cowardly indecision, looking like thieves caught breaking into a house they did not own. The contrast was brutal. It was undeniable. Dean Harrison, not realizing the drama, gestured to the front row. "Please," he encouraged. "Join us in celebrating this family." Tessa remained standing. Elaine and Grant, realizing that standing now would only emphasize their hesitation, collapsed back into their chairs. They shrank down, trying to make themselves invisible, but the camera did not blink. It held them there, pinned to the screen in their shame, while the applause for Tessa washed over them like a tidal wave. I waited. I let the applause peak. I let the image of my mother, my real mother, standing alone in the spotlight, burn itself into the retinas of everyone in the building. Then, I leaned into the microphone. "Thank you," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I looked at Elaine, who was now weeping, not with joy, but with the humiliation of total exposure. "Please be seated," I said. Tessa sat down, wiping her eyes. I opened my folder. I looked at the page marked Truth. "I am going to tell you a story," I began. "It is not a story about medicine. It is a story about the cost of a life and who is willing to pay it." I paused. It begins 15 years ago, in a hospital room not far from here, with an empty chair. The trap was sprung, the door was locked, and I began to read. Dean Harrison's voice boomed through the speakers, magnified by the acoustics of the Schottenstein Center. Dr. Kara Simmons. The name hung in the air for a fraction of a second before the arena detonated. The sound was not just polite applause. It was a roar, a collective release of energy from thousands of students who knew the work, the sleepless nights, and the sheer grit it took to reach this stage. In the front row, the reaction was immediate and visceral. Tessa stood up. She did not hesitate. She did not look around to see if anyone else was standing. She rose with the fluid grace of a woman who knew exactly where she belonged. She clapped her hands together, high and visible, her face wet with tears that caught the harsh arena lights. She was radiating a pride so intense it felt like it could power the entire city of Columbus. Next to her, Elaine's body betrayed her. Reflexively, caught up in the surge of noise, Elaine started to stand. It was a muscle memory from a life of social performance, but she only made it halfway. As she rose, she looked at the giant screen above us. She saw the camera feed. It showed Tessa, standing tall and beaming, and right next to her, it showed Elaine and Grant, hunched, uncertain, looking like intruders who had stumbled into a private moment. Elaine froze. She looked at Tessa, who was ignoring her completely, focused only on me. Then she looked around. She realized that the people in the rows behind them were not looking at the stage. They were looking at the front row. They were looking at the stark difference between the woman standing and the couple sitting. The audience was intelligent. They saw the body language. They saw the disconnect. Elaine sank back into her plastic chair, her face draining of color. She realized that by sitting in the front row, she had not claimed glory. She had positioned herself directly under the microscope. I walked to the podium. I placed my hands on the wood, feeling the grain under my fingertips. I looked out at the sea of faces. Then I looked down at the camera lens that was broadcasting my face to the screens. I took a breath. Thank you. Dean Harrison. I began, my voice steady and clear. Thank you to the faculty, to the staff, and to my fellow graduates. We made it. I let the applause ripple and die down. I smiled, a soft, professional smile that put everyone at ease. We spent the last 4 years learning the art of diagnosis. I continued. We learned to look at a set of symptoms, a fever, a tremor, a shadow on an X-ray, and deduce the truth hidden underneath. We learned that the body does not lie. It keeps the score. We took an oath to do no harm. We promised that when a patient is vulnerable, when they are scared, when they are at their absolute weakest, we will not abandon them. We will stand by the bedside. I saw the heads nodding in the audience. They were comfortable. They thought this was a standard speech about medical ethics. Elaine relaxed slightly in her seat. She thought I was sticking to the script. But medicine is not just about biology, I said, shifting my tone. It is about people. And sometimes, the most profound lessons do not come from a textbook. They come from the empty chair in a hospital room. I paused. The silence in the arena deepened. 15 years ago, a 13-year-old girl sat in a room at the Redwood Children's Center in Dayton. She had just been diagnosed with a terrifying autoimmune disorder. She was scared. She was in pain, and she was waiting. I looked directly at the camera. She was waiting for her parents to come back. They had told her they were going home to pack a bag. They said they would be right back. She watched the clock on the wall tick from 3 o'clock to 4, to midnight, to 3 in the morning. Elaine flinched. Grant looked up sharply, his eyes wide. They never came back. I said. A gasp rippled through the front sections. They did not come back because they were hurt. They did not come back because they were dead. They did not come back because they were prevented by a natural disaster. They did not come back because they had decided that a sick child was a liability they did not want to carry. I saw Madison, standing in the shadows of the tunnel entrance. She had covered her mouth with her hand. She was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. She knew this story, but she had never heard it said out loud. She had never heard the truth spoken without the filter of her parents' lies. That girl. I continued, my voice gaining strength, learned a hard truth that night. She learned that biology makes you a relative, but it does not make you family. I turned my gaze from the general audience and locked eyes with Tessa in the front row. But that night, someone else walked into the room. A nurse who had finished her shift hours ago, a woman who had no obligation, no biological tie, and no financial incentive. She sat in the chair that the others had vacated. She asked that girl a simple question. Who do you want to be here? I smiled at Tessa. She did not just stay for the night. She stayed for the appointments. She stayed for the infusion treatments that lasted 6 hours. She stayed up until 2 in the morning to learn algebra so she could tutor me when I was too sick to go to school. She worked double shifts and overnight shifts, destroying her own sleep schedule, just so she could afford the gas to drive me to specialists. Tessa was crying openly now, her hand over her heart. She taught me that love is not a noun. Love is a verb. It is an action. It is showing up when it is inconvenient. It is showing up when it is expensive. It is showing up when it is scary. I paused. I let the emotions settle. Then, I hardened my expression. I looked directly at Elaine and Grant. However, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. Not everyone understands this definition of love. Elaine looked like she wanted to vomit. Grant was staring at his shoes, his face a mask of red fury and humiliation. Some people believe that love is an investment strategy. I said, some people believe that you can discard a human being when their stock is low, and then buy back in when their value rises. The camera zoomed in on the VIP section. The image on the screen was brutal. Elaine and Grant looked small, petty, and exposed. The people sitting around them were leaning away. creating a physical distance, as if their selfishness was contagious. "There are people here today," I said, raising my voice to fill the rafters, "who are sitting in the front row, wearing expensive clothes, hoping to take a photo with the valedictorian. They are hoping that if they smile wide enough, the world will forget the timeline." I opened the folder on the podium. But as scientists, we love data, so let us look at the data. I read from the paper. Date: January 28, 2011. The day guardianship was transferred to the state of Ohio because the biological parents refused to provide home care. I looked up. Date: February 2nd, 2011. 5 days later, while I was in the hospital learning to walk again, flight records show that my biological parents flew to Aspen for a ski vacation. A murmur of shock and disgust swept through the arena. It was a low, angry sound. Date: April 15th, 2014, 2015, and 2016. Tax records show that these same parents claimed the disability tax credit for a child they had not seen or spoken to in years. Elaine let out a sob, but it was drowned out by the crowd. Grant looked like he was about to pass out. He was gripping the armrests of his chair as if the earth was opening up beneath him. I closed the folder. I do not say this to be cruel. I said, I say this because I believe in the light. You cannot heal a wound if you leave it infected in the dark. You have to open it up. You have to clean it out. I took a step back from the podium, but I kept my hand on the microphone. I am not standing here today as the daughter of Elaine and Grant Simmons. That girl died in that hospital room 15 years ago. I pointed to Tessa. I am standing here as the daughter of Tessa Alvarez, the woman who saved my life, the woman who taught me that family is not about DNA. It is about who stays. The arena exploded. It started in the back, with the students. Then it swept forward to the faculty, the parents, the guests. 18,000 people stood up. The sound was deafening. It was a wave of validation that washed over the stage and crashed into the front row. Tessa stood up again, sobbing, turning to acknowledge the crowd. Elaine and Grant remained seated. They were the only two people in the entire front section who were sitting. They were isolated in a canyon of standing people. They were invisible, buried under the weight of the truth. Madison, standing in the tunnel, had turned her back on them. She was walking away, disappearing into the darkness of the corridor, finally choosing to leave the sinking ship. I watched them. I watched Elaine bury her face in her hands. I watched Grant stare blankly at the floor. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel angry. I felt clean. I waited for the applause to die down. It took a long time. When the silence finally returned, I leaned into the microphone for one last sentence. I do not stand here to punish the people who left, I said softly. I stand here to name the love of the person who stayed. Thank you. Mom, this degree belongs to you. I walked off the stage. I did not go back to my seat. I walked down the stairs, ignoring the outstretched hands of the faculty members who wanted to congratulate me. I walked straight to the front row. Tessa met me at the barrier. She pulled me into her arms, and we held each other right there, in front of everyone. I buried my face in her shoulder, smelling the familiar scent of her soap. We did it, she whispered. We did. I said, as we turned to leave. Walking up the center aisle toward the exit, I felt a hand reach out. Kara. It was Elaine. She had pushed her way to the edge of the row. Her mascara was running down her face in black streaks. She looked desperate, pathetic. Kara, please, she choked out. You have to understand. We were scared. We can explain. Grant was behind her, looking pale and shaken. Kara, be reasonable, he hissed. Think about what you just did. I stopped. I looked at them. For a moment, I saw the ghosts of the parents I had once worshipped. I saw the people I had cried for, but they were like smoke now. They had no substance. I did not yell. I did not demand an apology. I simply stepped back, creating a physical boundary between us. There is nothing to explain, I said calmly. The data is peer-reviewed. Elaine reached for my hand again. But I am your mother, she wailed. I looked at Tessa, who was standing beside me, her hand resting protectively on my back. "No," I said, "you are just a donor, and the transaction is closed." I turned my back on them. "Come on, Mom," I said to Tessa, "let's go get dinner." We walked up the aisle, side by side, leaving them behind in the shadows of the arena. I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew exactly who I was, and I knew exactly whose hand I was holding. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me where you are tuning in from and what you would have done if you were in Kara's shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Jane Revenge Stories. Hit the like button, and do not forget to press the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need to hear it.